Don't you understand, Dad? This is a gathering for the elite, for people who work with their intellect and their vision, Julian said, his voice as cold as a freshly sharpened blade. He didn't look at my face. His eyes were fixed on my grease-stained work boots, standing on the pristine quartz floor of the penthouse. He took a sip of 18-year-old scotch, a single bottle costing as much as a welder's monthly salary, and continued with a look of sickening pity. Your vibe just doesn't fit. You're bringing the smell of scrap metal and salt water in here. Elena's guests are influencers and million-dollar investors. They don't need to see a retired old man with scarred hands ruining their live stream. I looked down at my hands. They were a map of jagged white scars and burns from welding torches Marx earned 40 years ago while I patched ship hulls in the middle of offshore storms just to pay for his tuition. I started to say something, but Elena, his wife, stepped forward with a canister of disinfectant. She sprayed the air where I had just walked. Her face twisted as if she were standing next to a pile of rotting trash. "Arthur, honestly, we're doing this for you," Elena said with a fake smile that made my skin crawl. "You'd be so out of place here. It's better if you take the service stairs. There's a dive bar on the corner downstairs that's probably more your speed anyway. I am Arthur, 72 years old, a retired marine salvage engineer. I spent my life raising massive ships from the ocean floor, but I never imagined the most rotten thing I'd ever face was my own son's conscience. The boy I raised with my sweat, my blood, and my sleepless nights at sea had just told me I was a system error in his high society life. He and his wife had no idea that this 5 million penthouse, the yacht they flaunted online, and his self-made entrepreneur title were built on a foundation I could demolish with a single signature. I stood silently in the vast living room of the unit on the 41st floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the lights of the Chicago harbor sparkled like crushed diamonds on the dark Michigan water. This was the place I had bought 3 years ago through an anonymous holding company, Redford Holdings. I had wanted Julian to have the best start, to be proud of where he came from. But looking at his $4,000 tailored suit and Elena's silver silk dress, I knew I had made a mistake. The room smelled of expensive perfume and white lilies, but to me, it reeked of betrayal. I wore my old oily flannel jacket and worn leather boots, the uniform that had seen me through 100 salvages. To Julian, it was garbage. To me, it was the armor of an honest man. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered oak box. Inside was an antique brass nautical compass, a gift my grandfather, a sea captain, had left me. "Julian, I brought this for you. It helped our family navigate the roughest waters. I wanted you to remember that no matter how far you go, the right direction is the only thing that matters." Elena glanced at the box, not bothering to touch it. "Arthur, that rusty antique is going to scratch our Italian marble table. You should keep it as a souvenir of your own era." Julian nodded in agreement with his wife. "She's right, Dad. We use GPS and AI for navigation now. These manual old things just don't have value in my world anymore." That was the moment I realized I was no longer a father in their eyes. I was a utility, a mobile ATM. Looking at the 2-carat diamond ring on Elena's finger, I remembered clearly transferring $50,000 to Julian a few months ago when he said he wanted to buy a gift to strengthen family bonds. It turned out my money had the sweet taste of success, but my presence had the bitter tang of embarrassment. They wanted the funds from my rusted hands, but they wanted those hands to stay at the bottom of a ship far away from the chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton or this penthouse. Instead of arguing, I chose silence, the silence of an engineer observing a structure beginning to fracture. I looked into Julian's eyes one last time, trying to find a trace of the boy who used to run to meet me every time my ship docked, but I found only a cold, arrogant emptiness. "Congratulations, Julian," I said, my voice as quiet as the sea before a storm. I hope this success is worth the price you've chosen to pay." I turned my back and walked toward the service elevator as they wished. Laughter erupted behind me the second I stepped away. They thought they had just scrubbed a stain from their party. They didn't know that as I walked out of that building, I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to see my lawyer, Sarah. I stood before the elevator and reached out to press the biometric sensor, but the machine flashed red. Access denied. Julian had secretly wiped my fingerprints from the building's security system that afternoon. He hadn't just kicked me out of the party. He had officially locked his heart and my own property against me. I pulled out my old phone and the screen cracked at the corner. I didn't call Julian to beg. I called Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah," I said, staring at the Redford Holdings logo in the lobby. "Stop all rent transfers for Unit 41. Activate the Special Asset Control protocols. I want to start a massive salvage operation. And this time, the object we're recovering is the conscience of a fraud." Sarah was silent on the other end for a second before asking, "Are you sure, Arthur? Once this starts, Julian loses everything. He'll have to face the reality you've been shielding him from for years." "I'm sure," I replied. "I've spent my life saving sinking ships. It's time Julian learned how to swim on his own or sink for good." I sat in my old workshop, the air heavy with the scent of lubricating oil and aged cedar. A sanctuary where the roar of the city felt like a distant memory. I looked at my hands, tracing the deep, permanent calluses that had become my only true souvenirs from 40 years of hauling steel and pouring concrete in the freezing Chicago winters. I built my life and my fortune one brick at a time, one salvaged hull at a time. Yet looking at me, most people, including my own son, saw only an old man in a worn-out flannel shirt and work boots. Julian lived for the image, oblivious to the fact that his entire luxury lifestyle was subsidized by the very man he considered a system error. He believed Redford Holdings was a faceless corporation. A lucky coincidence of a name never bothering to ask where the money actually came from. He was ashamed of the dirty hands that built his clean life, erasing me from his history as if my sweat hadn't been the mortar for his castle. 3 days had passed since I walked out of that penthouse, and the silence from Julian was a deafening weight. I found myself at Lou's Diner, a place where the coffee is strong and the air smells of bacon grease and hard work, a stark contrast to the sterile perfume-scented air of the apartment I paid for. I felt more at home among the night shift nurses and truck drivers than I ever did on Julian's Italian leather sofa. I was staring at my cup when my phone began to vibrate against the laminate table, the screen lighting up with Julian's name. I didn't pick up immediately. I wanted to see if the silence had taught him anything. But I knew in my bones he wasn't calling to apologize. "Dad, are you there?" Julian's voice pierced my ear. But it wasn't the arrogant tone from the party. It was weak, ragged, and trembling, the sound of a man using his last reserve of oxygen. "I'm at the hospital, Dad, at Northwestern. It happened so fast. I was just walking and my chest, it felt like an elephant was sitting on it." I collapsed. My blood ran cold, the anger I had been nursing for weeks, evaporating in a single heartbeat of parental instinct. "Julian, what are you saying? Are you okay? Is the doctor there?" I asked, my voice rising as I prepared to run to my truck. "The doctors, they say it's a critical failure, Dad. Acute liver failure, a congenital defect, that finally gave out under the stress." Julian wheezed, his voice hitching with a sob. "They need to operate immediately. It's critical, but there's a problem, a massive problem. We let our insurance policy lapse last month because money was so tight. They won't even prep the specialist team without a deposit. They need $150,000 up front, Dad, or they can't do the transplant. They said I might not make it through the night without it. Please, Dad. I don't want to die." The number hung in the air like a heavy fog, $150,000. It was a specific, staggering amount, the price of my son's life. I'm coming, Julian. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll handle the bank, I said, already reaching for my wallet, ready to liquidate any asset necessary to save him. No, wait. Julian interrupted, a sudden urgency cutting through his feigned weakness. You won't be able to see me. I'm already being prepped for the sterile zone. You have to wire it, Dad. Wire it to Elena's personal account. It's faster that way. She can pay the hospital billing department directly from her phone. If you try to come here and deal with the paperwork, it'll be too late. Please just send it now. Wire it to a personal account. The request struck a strange, dissonant chord in my mind. Hospitals have complex billing departments and financial counselors. They don't usually ask patients on gurneys to have their wives handle six-figure wire transfers to personal accounts. I hesitated for just a second, my engineer mode or detective mode overriding the panic. I thought about the toxic small details, the way Elena had sprayed the air around me, the way Julian had bowed to a crowd that called him a self-made man while wearing a suit I bought. Instead of pressing the confirm button on my banking app, I called Sarah Jenkins, my lawyer, on my second line. Sarah, I need a location check, now. Julian says he's at Northwestern in critical condition. He's asking for a $150,000 wire for an emergency transplant. Sarah didn't sound panicked. She sounded clinical. Give me 60 seconds, Arthur. I'm pulling the GPS data on the corporate lease vehicle he's driving. I waited, listening to Julian's ragged Oscar-worthy breathing in my other ear. Arthur, look at your tablet, Sarah commanded. I opened the encrypted file she sent. It wasn't a medical record. It was a high-resolution photograph taken 10 minutes ago. It showed a man in a fluffy white robe holding a glass of cucumber water and laughing as he looked at a spa menu. It was Julian. The location tag wasn't Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It was the Azure Sanctuary, a luxury wellness resort where a weekend package costs more than most people make in a month. The fear in my chest vanished, replaced by a hollow, echoing void. This wasn't just greed or entitlement. It was evil leveraging a father's worst nightmare, the fear of his child's death just to fund a lifestyle of champagne and spa treatments. Julian wasn't a son in that moment. He was a con artist, and I was the mark. Dad, are you there? Julian wheezed, his performance growing even more dramatic. The pain. It's getting worse. Please tell me the transfer is done. I sat back slowly in the diner booth, my voice becoming dangerously calm. I'm at the bank, Julian. I lied. But there's an issue. Most of my money is tied up in fixed assets, as you know. I don't have $150,000 in liquid cash sitting in a checking account. I heard a sharp intake of breath, the tremolo in his voice sharpening into frustration. But you have the house. You have the vintage Ford truck. Can't you take an emergency loan? It's life or death, Dad. I can't get a loan that fast, I said, watching Sarah on the screen as she nodded in silent approval. But I have a buyer who has been pestering me for years for that truck. He offered me a significant sum. I can sell it today, but it will take time to get the cash and transfer the title. Maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Julian demanded, his voice suddenly sounding much stronger. Can you ask the doctors to stabilize me if I show them proof that you're selling the truck and the money is guaranteed? Yes, I think I can convince them to wait. But you have to promise, Dad. You have to promise you'll send every cent. I promise, I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth, because I knew he was using my honesty to destroy me. I will send you exactly what you deserve. I hung up and stared at the screen. Julian was at a spa getting a facial while telling me his heart was failing. I looked at Sarah. He showed me who he is, I whispered. Now I have to believe him. Prepare the next phase, I told her. In 2 weeks, they'll be waiting for a check to cover their luxury debts and their next rent cycle. I want to make sure they get something else instead. I'm done being the safety net. It's time I became the gravity. I finished my coffee. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. I had work to do. My son was busy spending his inheritance. I was going to make sure there wouldn't be one left to spend. I walked into the law offices of Jenkins and Associates, the marble floors echoing beneath my boots as I bypassed the reception desk. I wasn't wearing the suit yet. I was still Arthur, the man with grease under his fingernails and 40 years of salt air in his lungs. Sarah was waiting for me in her corner office, her face a mask of grim professional determination that told me she had already processed the digital evidence I had sent her from the diner. "You look like you're preparing for a war," Arthur, Sarah said, closing the leather portfolio on her desk labeled Redford Holdings Asset Management. "I'm not preparing for a war, Sarah," I replied, sitting in the heavy leather chair that creaked under my weight. "I'm preparing for a correction. A salvage operation for a vessel that's taken on too much rot to stay afloat." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "I've pulled the full ledger for the Lakeshore property as you requested. Julian and Elena are officially 10 days delinquent on their $6,500 rent and the $500 amenity fee. For 3 years, you've been subsidizing this lifestyle through automatic internal transfers from your personal account to the holding company. Julian has never looked at a contract in his life. He thinks Redford Holdings is just some faceless corporation that happens to share his last name. Stop the transfers." I said, my voice flat and devoid of the heat I had felt at the penthouse dinner. "I want every automatic payment canceled. I want the late fees applied, and I want the standard collection protocol initiated. No exceptions for family." Sarah hesitated, tapping her pen against the mahogany. "Standard protocol means a 3-day notice to pay or quit, Arthur. It means if they don't produce the $14,500 they now owe for the back rent, and the current month the sheriff comes to put their furniture on the curb. Are you sure you want the legal representative of the property management firm to be the one to break this to them? They might finally connect the dots." "Let them connect whatever dots they can find," I replied. "Julian told me he was dying to scam me out of $150,000. He stood in a spa robe at the Azure Sanctuary and wept about his liver failing, while I was ready to sell my father's compass and my vintage Ford to save him. He didn't just lie to me, Sarah. He weaponized my love for him to fund a vacation. He showed me who he is. I'm finally choosing to believe him." Sarah nodded and spun her tablet around, showing a new series of reports. "He's not just spending your money on spas, Arthur. He's leveraged everything. He's opened 3 new high-interest credit cards in the last 48 hours, convinced that your $50,000 truck sale is coming in 2 weeks. He's already spent $10,000 of that imaginary money on a venture launch party scheduled for tonight at the penthouse. He's calling it a seed round for a branding startup. He's trying to sell a dream of success to investors using your apartment as the stage." I looked at the guest list on the screen. Marcus Sterling. The venture guys from the Loop. People who wouldn't be caught dead in a room with a retired salvage engineer. He's selling them a lie, Sarah. He told Sterling I was a retired handyman. He told them he built his capital from crypto. The audit shows you're worth north of $80 million. Arthur? Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You own 5 residential towers in this city. You own the land under the very diner where you eat breakfast. You've spent 40 years building a foundation of steel and concrete, and your son is trying to sell a castle made of clouds. If you do this, you aren't just evicting him from a penthouse. You're evicting him from his entire reality. He already evicted me from his life, Sarah, I said, thinking of the empty chair at the Ritz-Carlton and the disinfectant Elena had sprayed in the air. He told his friends I belonged in the shadows. He called me a mobile wallet. Cruel isn't serving a legal notice for unpaid rent. Cruel is a son looking his father in the eye and telling him he isn't special enough to witness his joy. This isn't revenge. It's consequences. I stood up, adjusting my baseball cap. Frank, the building manager, is he ready? He's waiting for your signal, Sarah confirmed. He has the envelope with the red, urgent stamp. He's going to slide it under the door at precisely 10 a.m., right when Julian is likely waking up to order his luxury breakfast on a credit card that's about to be declined. Good, I said. And I want you to prepare the final sale documents for the Lakeshore building. I'm liquidating the asset. I'm done being a landlord for tenants who don't respect the foundation. I'm starting a new account, Sarah. The Redford Scholarship for Trades. I want every cent of the $3 million profit from that penthouse sale to go toward buying tools for apprentices' kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression of respect I hadn't seen in years. You're really going through with it. You're cutting the limb to save the body I've spent my life salvaging. What can be saved in letting the rest sink, I said, walking toward the door. Julian chose his family, and he made it very clear that I wasn't part of it. He wanted a phone-free ceremony and an intimate life for special people. I'm just giving him exactly what he asked for, a life without me. As I stepped into the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. I was a builder. I was a father who had finally realized that unconditional funding is not the same as unconditional love. I had work to do, and for the first time in their lives, so did Julian and Elena. Sarah, I called back as the doors began to close. Make sure the font on that notice is large enough for them to read without their designer sunglasses. I wouldn't want them to miss a single detail of their new reality. I took the elevator down to the lobby where Frank was waiting. He tipped his hat to me, but I didn't stop to talk. The time for mercy had ended. The time for business had begun. I was going to my truck to wait. I wanted to be there when the first crack appeared in their glass castle. I sat in the cab of my old pickup truck parked 2 blocks away from the North Lakeshore Tower, watching the glass and steel reach for the gray Chicago sky, like a monument to things that shouldn't exist. It was 10 o'clock on the 10th of the month, a significant date in my world. The 1st is when rent is due. The 5th is when the grace period ends, and the 10th is when patience officially runs out. I checked my watch, imagining the scene 41 floors up. Julian would be sitting at that glass dining table staring at a laptop screen, flashing a red error message because the automatic flow of my funds had finally stopped. He'd be trying to pay the American Express bill for the champagne and flowers from the Ritz-Carlton, only to see transaction declined, staring back at him. My phone began to vibrate against the dashboard, Julian's name lighting up the screen. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I wanted him to feel the weight of the silence before I picked up. Dad, where have you been? We've been calling you for an hour. Julian's voice cracked with a panic that wasn't faked this time. The money to transfer it hasn't shown up. The landlord's portal is showing a delinquency notice, and we can't even pay the credit cards. We're locked out of our accounts, Dad. Did you forget to press the button? I took a slow sip of hot coffee from my thermos, keeping my voice groggy like an old man who had just been woken from a nap. I'm moving a bit slow today, Julian. The arthritis in my knees is acting up. Why are you shouting? It's the 10th, Dad, he shouted, his voice trembling. The rent is $7,000 and we don't have it. We spent everything on the wedding, you know that. Well, son, I have some bad news, I said, letting the silence stretch between us until it felt heavy and uncomfortable. Things are a little tight this month. My pension check was delayed, some mix-up with the paperwork at the Social Security office. It's a real headache. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end, before Julian's voice came back thin and desperate. What do you mean, tight? We have a reputation in this building. We can't be the people who don't pay rent. I looked out at the busy street at people rushing to work who paid their own bills and didn't call their fathers for handouts. "I'm afraid I can't help you this time, Julian. I have to buy medicine and fix the truck. But you're a successful entrepreneur, right? You're the self-made man everyone toasted to at the wedding. I'm sure you can figure it out, maybe sell some of those wedding gifts." I heard a scuffle on the other end, and then Elena's voice pierced my ear, shrill and hysterical. "Are you joking, Arthur? This isn't funny. $7,000. Do you have any idea what happens if we don't pay? They'll put a mark on our credit. You want us out on the street, is that what you want? You're doing this on Mukdik because you're bitter about the wedding, aren't you, Elena?" "I'm not bitter. I'm just broke. Or at least that's what you should assume," I said, my voice dropping the act and becoming cold as a winter lake. "You wanted me out of the picture, remember? Well, my wallet has disappeared along with me." "But we have a lease," she shrieked. "You can't just stop paying?" "Actually, I think you'll find the lease is in your names," I replied. "You signed it. You live there. It's your responsibility. Welcome to the real world, son." I hung up and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, breathing in the silence. It didn't feel good, but it felt necessary, like a contractor who finally decided to demolish a building too rotten to save. I picked up my other phone, the one I used for Redford Holdings business. "Frank," I said when the building manager answered. "Has the mail been delivered to Unit 41 yet?" "I'm walking up there right now," Sir Frank said. I have the envelope in my hand. Red urgent stamp official notice of non-payment and intent to evict. "Good," I said. "Slide it under the door. Make sure it's visible." I started the truck and pulled into traffic, imagining the scene upstairs as that red logo of the management company slid across their pristine floorboards like a bloodstain. I knew exactly what desperation looked like because I'd seen it in the mirror 40 years ago. But Julian and Elena were about to learn a different version of it. Later that afternoon, my private investigator sent the photos. They showed Elena walking into a high-end consignment shop called the Velvet Vault, clutching the $6,000 Chanel bag I'd bought for her birthday. She looked terrified behind her huge sunglasses as she slammed the bag onto the counter and demanded cash today. The clerk offered her $2,500, and Elena took it muttering curses about the cheap old man who was forcing her to sell her things. While she was liquidating her closet, Julian was sitting in his car calling every special person from the Ritz-Carlton, trying to float a $5,000 loan for his startup. One by one, they turned their backs on him, offering excuses about liquidity and signal problems before hanging up. He didn't have friends. He had an audience, and the show had just been canceled. When they met back at the apartment that evening, the tension was flammable. Elena threw her empty purse onto the sofa and screamed at Julian. "Why is your father doing this? He has the money. He's sitting on a pile of cash and letting us drown. It's abusive. Threaten him," she spat when Julian said I wouldn't budge. "Call him right now and tell him he'll never hold his grandchildren. Tell him he'll die alone. That's the only thing old people care about, legacy." They managed to scrape the $7,000 together by maxing out 3 different credit cards and using the pawn shop cash. They paid the management company at 11:59 p.m., just 1 minute before the eviction filing would have been automatic. They bought themselves 30 days of shelter, but they didn't get jobs and they didn't apologize. They just leveraged their future debt to maintain an illusion for 1 more month. I sat in my dark house looking at Frank's report. They had survived the battle, but they had no idea the war was just beginning. Next month was coming, and I had no intention of buying any more purses for them to sell. "Sarah," I said into the phone as the clock struck midnight. 2 weeks from now, when they're waiting for that $50,000 check for the truck, I want to finalize the sale of the building. If they want to live in a penthouse, they can deal with the new owners. And I have a feeling they won't be as patient as I was. 2 weeks had evaporated like water on hot pavement, and the promised $50,000 from the sale of my vintage Ford had not materialized. It was the 1st of July, a date that loomed over Penthouse 41, like a guillotine blade. I was sitting in a quiet coffee shop in the Loop with Sarah Jenkins reviewing quarterly reports, but my mind was on the phantom limb sensation where my family used to be. When my phone finally rang with the shrill, demanding tone I had assigned to Julian years ago, Sarah closed her folder and watched me. "Dad," Julian whispered, his voice trembling like a man using his last reserve of oxygen. "I'm at Northwestern. It happened so fast. My chest, it felt like an elephant was sitting on it." I collapsed. "The doctors say it's a congenital defect, a valve issue. They need to operate immediately, Dad. It's critical." The anger I'd been nursing for weeks threatened to crumble under the weight of parental instinct. I was already reaching for my wallet, ready to liquidate anything to save my boy. "I'm coming, Julian," I said, my voice rising. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "No, wait," Julian interrupted with sudden urgency. "You won't be able to see me. They're prepping me for surgery. But there's a problem. We let the insurance policy lapse because money was so tight. They won't operate without a deposit. They need $50,000 up front, Dad, or they can't do it. They said I might not make it through the night." I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Sarah. "He's in the hospital. Heart failure. He needs $50,000 for surgery right now." I started to stand up, ready to be the mobile wallet again, because what good is a lesson if your son is dead? But Sarah didn't move. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out her tablet. "Wait, Arthur," she mouthed. "Dad, please," Julian wept in my ear. "Just wire it to my personal account. It's faster that way, so I can pay the hospital directly." That struck a strange chord. Hospitals have billing departments. They don't ask patients on gurneys to Venmo 50 grand. I hesitated for a second as Sarah spun the tablet toward me. It wasn't a medical chart. It was a high-resolution photograph taken 10 minutes ago. It showed Julian standing at a reception desk in a fluffy white robe, holding a glass of cucumber water and looking healthy. The location tag wasn't Northwestern. It was the Azure Sanctuary, a luxury wellness spa outside the city, where a weekend package costs $2,000. The fear in my chest vanished, replaced by a hollow void. Julian was performing an Oscar-worthy act of ragged breathing while sipping spa water to scam me out of $50,000. He wasn't just a bad son. He was a con artist, and I was the mark. "I'm at the bank, Julian," I lied, my voice dangerously calm. "But since I'm retired, most of my money is tied up. I don't have $50,000 in liquid cash, but you have the house. You have the truck," Julian shouted, losing his fake tremolo. "It's life or death, Dad. I'll tell you what I said," watching Sarah nod in steel-eyed approval. "I have a buyer for the vintage Ford. He offered me $45,000 last month. I'll call him now, but it will take 2 weeks to get the cash and transfer the title. Can you ask the doctors to stabilize you? Maybe they'll take a payment plan if they know the money is coming." 2 weeks. "I think I can convince them," Julian said, his voice suddenly much stronger. "If they know the money is guaranteed. You have to promise, Dad. Send every cent." "I promise," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'll send you exactly what you deserve." 20 miles away at the Azure Sanctuary, Julian tossed his phone onto a lounge chair and let out a whoop of victory. Hook, line, and sinker, he grinned at Elena, who was getting a pedicure. "He's selling the precious truck. 50 grand is coming in 2 weeks. Then we don't have to worry about the budget today," Elena shrieked, pulling out a new high-interest credit card they had opened that morning. "Let's get the couple's massage and order a bottle of Dom. We deserve it." Back in the coffee shop, I deleted the photo of my son in his robe. I wasn't selling the truck. I was giving them 2 weeks of rope, and they had just decided to use it to hang themselves. Prepare for the next phase, I told Sarah. In 2 weeks, they'll be waiting for a check. I want them to get an eviction notice instead. Finalize the sale of the building. I'm liquidating the asset. If they want a penthouse, they can deal with the new owners. This is going to get ugly, Arthur Sarah warned. When people like them get squeezed, they don't get humble. They get desperate. I've already heard enough, I said, finishing my cold coffee. I'm the landlord, and rent is due. Where is it? He promised 2 weeks. Julian's voice was tight with a panic that had curdled into nausea as he stared at his phone. I've refreshed the banking app 100 times in the last hour, Elena. The balance is still stubbornly, terrifyingly low. The transfer from the truck sale is nowhere to be found. Elena paced the length of the living room, her voice sharp and pale. Maybe the bank flagged it for review because it's a large transfer. Call him again. I've called 10 times, Julian snapped, throwing the phone onto the sofa. It goes straight to voicemail. He said he was going fishing with Uncle Mike and might be out of range. Fishing. He's fishing while our lives are hanging by a thread. How selfish can one old man be? Elena spat the words like a curse. A heavy thud echoed from the front hallway. Not a knock, but the sound of something substantial being slid under the mahogany door. Julian walked to the marble entryway and picked up a thick, cream-colored envelope. The return address was Sarah Jenkins, an associate's legal counsel for Redford Holdings Property Management. Open it, Elena commanded, her voice trembling. Julian tore the seal, his breath hitching, as he read the bold red letters at the top. Notice of termination of tenancy and demand for possession. It says our tenancy is terminated effective immediately for non-payment of rent late fees and service charges totaling $14,500. We have 3 days to vacate or face the sheriff. 3 days. That's impossible. You have to give 30 days. Elena shrieked, snatching the paper from his hand. We got the warnings, Elena. We got the texts and the emails, but we ignored them because we thought the check was coming, Julian said, sinking to the floor. He lied to us. He didn't sell the truck or he kept the money. We're finished. We maxed out the new cards on the spa trip and dinners. We can't even afford a moving truck. Elena looked around the penthouse, her eyes darting back and forth with a cold, calculating fury. No, we are not finished. We still have this apartment for 3 days, and 3 days is a lifetime in our world. It's a $4 million asset that screams success. If we leave now, we leave as failures. But if we use this place one last time, we can pivot. Use it for what Julian asked, looking up at her. A launch event, an exclusive investment opportunity. Elena said, her voice gaining strength. We invite everyone. Chad, Mike, the venture guys from the Loop. We pitch them your branding company and tell them we're opening a seed round for $200,000 in capital. We tell them it's an exclusive buy-in. But I don't have a company. I just have a website and some business cards, Julian stammered. They don't know that. You sell the dream, Julian. If we throw the most lavish, exclusive party this city has seen, they will believe we are successful. They will write the checks. We can raise enough to pay the back rent and stop the eviction. It's a Hail Mary, but it's the only play we have left. How do we pay for a party? We have no cash, Julian asked. We have the emergency card we saved, the one with the $10,000 limit. We spent it all tonight. Catering, high-end liquor, live music. Money attracts money, Julian. If we look rich, we get everything. Julian felt the adrenaline of the con. Okay, let's go all in. Black tie tonight. We tell them we just closed a massive deal and want to celebrate. By 6 o'clock, the apartment was transformed with cases of Dom Perignon chilling in ice buckets. Lucas stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tuxedo. The RSVPs are rolling in, Elena said, checking her phone. Chad is coming. The venture guys are coming. This is going to work. Should we invite Dad? Julian asked, a sudden pang of habit striking him. Maybe if he sees us succeeding, he'll understand. We could even pay him back. Elena's face hardened into a mask of pure disdain. Are you joking? After he left us to rot, after he made me sell my bag? He's a liability, Julian. This is a high-end event for the elite. Do you want him stumbling in here in his work boots talking about fishing? He's bad energy. He's the past. Besides, he's probably too busy counting his pennies in that sad little diner to even come. They clinked their glasses of champagne and laughed, preparing to welcome the world into a home that wasn't theirs, with money they didn't have. They had no idea that the guest of honor wasn't going to be an investor. It was going to be the truth. I sat in Sarah Jenkins' office in the Loop, the heart of Chicago's business district, where the marble floors echoed under my footsteps. I had traded my old flannel shirt for a charcoal gray suit tailored in Milan, cut from wool so fine it felt like silk. My shirt was a crisp white Egyptian cotton, and my shoes were handcrafted leather polished to a mirror shine. On my wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than my son's imaginary startup. This was the Thomas Redford the business world knew. This was the chairman. You look like you're ready for a war, Arthur Sarah said, looking up from a thick file labeled Redford Holdings Asset Management. I'm not ready for a war, Sarah, I replied, sitting in the leather chair that creaked under my weight. I'm ready for a correction. I'm ready to salvage a vessel that's taken on too much rot to stay afloat. Sarah opened the folder, her voice professional and sharp. The audit is complete. Most people, including Julian, think you're just a retired contractor with a decent pension. They don't know that for 40 years, every dollar you made went into land. They don't know that you own 5 residential towers in this city, including the one at 400 North Lake Shore Drive. You own strip malls in the suburbs and the land under the very diner where you eat breakfast. You are worth north of $80 million. Arthur and your son just treated you like a beggar. He didn't just treat me like a beggar, Sarah, I said, leaning forward, my hand steady against the mahogany of her desk. He leveraged my fear of his death to try and scam me out of $150,000 while he was sipping Spawn Nuke at a luxury resort. He excluded me from his history because he was ashamed of the dirty hands that built his clean life. He wants to play the self-made man tonight. I'm going to give him the opportunity to be exactly that, starting from zero. The town car is waiting at the curb, Sarah said, picking up her leather portfolio. The private security detail is already in place. Frank, the building manager, has locked down the service elevators. No one leaves with so much as a piece of furniture until you give the word. We walked into the lobby of the North Lake Shore Tower a few minutes later. A black town car idled at the curb, and 4 men in dark suits wearing earpieces stepped out first, creating a phalanx of protection. I walked into the lobby, my cane clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, not as a support, but as a scepter. Kevin, the young night shift doorman who had replaced Henry, looked at the entourage and then at my face, a face he had only seen in passing as the nice old man from Julian's family. Sir, can I help you? Kevin stammered, stumbling out from behind the desk. Frank, the building manager, came running out of the back office, breathless. He saw me and immediately bowed his head, showing a level of respect that made Kevin's eyes go wide. Chairman Redford, Frank said, his voice trembling slightly. Welcome back, sir. The elevator is ready. I've overridden the penthouse lockouts. You have direct access. Is the security secure? I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Yes, sir, Frank replied. We have total control of the building's infrastructure. I stepped into the elevator, flanked by Sarah and my security detail. Frank swiped the master key card and pressed the button for the penthouse. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a capsule of silence, as the digital display began to tick upward into 2030. With every passing floor, the father in me died a little more, and the businessman took over. I could hear the thumping of the bass through the heavy doors as we approached the 41st floor. It was the sound of my money being burned for an illusion. I buttoned my jacket and straightened my tie. I prepared to make an entrance they would talk about for the rest of their lives. The elevator chimed, the doors opened, and a wall of sound hit me, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns swirling under the crystal chandelier I had paid for. Laughter rang out loud and brittle. Julian stood in the center of the room, holding court with Marcus Sterling, a venture capitalist known for high-risk plays. "The concept is simple," Marcus Julian was saying, his voice smooth and projecting a confidence he didn't truly possess. "We're disrupting the lifestyle branding space with AI-curated luxury experiences. We're looking for a $200,000 seed investment." "It's an impressive setup you have here," Julian Sterling replied, looking around the room. "You certainly live the brand. My gut says you're a man who knows how to win." I walked forward, my cane tapping a steady, ominous rhythm on the marble floor. My bodyguards moved with me, a wedge of dark suits cutting through the colorful crowd. The people on the periphery stopped mid-sentence, their drinks halfway to their mouths, instinctively backing away as they saw the grim-faced men surrounding me. A hush started to ripple through the room, spreading outward from the entryway like a wave of cold water. Elena saw me first. She was standing on a raised platform, microphone in hand, about to make a toast. When her eyes landed on me, her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. She didn't see the suit or the watch. She only saw the old man she despised, the one she thought she had banished to the shadows. "Security," she screamed into the microphone, her voice booming through the speakers, shrill and distorted. "Who let this man in here? Get him out right now. He's ruining everything." The DJ, sensing the tension, cut the music. The sudden absence of the bass left a ringing in everyone's ears. All eyes turned to me. I stood there calm and immovable. While my daughter-in-law shrieked like a banshee, Julian spun around, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat. He ran toward me, his hands waving frantically as he tried to shoo me away like a stray dog. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and deep humiliation. "Look at you. You're crashing my launch party. This is a private event, and you're embarrassing me in front of investors. Please just go home. Leave before you ruin the deal." He reached out to grab my arm, intending to physically push me back toward the elevator. But before his hand could even touch my sleeve, one of my bodyguards stepped in, placing a large, immovable hand on Julian's chest and stopping him cold. "Do not touch him," the bodyguard said, his voice low and dangerous. Julian stumbled back, shock written all over his face. "Dad, tell your friend to back off. This is my apartment." I didn't say a word to him. I didn't even look at him. I looked past him at the confused guests, making eye contact with the investors who were holding their champagne flutes uncertainly. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sound was sharp and decisive, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Frank, the building manager, stepped out from behind me, holding a wireless microphone he had taken from the DJ booth. He looked nervous, but he knew who signed his paychecks. He knew who the chairman was. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," Frank announced, his voice finding its strength. "I am the building manager for this property. I am afraid I have some unfortunate news. This event is officially over." A gasp rippled through the room, a sound like a sudden intake of cold air that chilled the heat of the celebration. Elena stormed down from the platform, her silver silk gown trailing behind her like a dying shadow as her heels clacked furiously against the floorboards. She marched up to Frank, her face inches from his, her voice a shrill weapon. "Who do you think you are?" she screamed, her breath hot and smelling of expensive champagne. You work for us. We pay the rent. You can't cancel my party. I will have you fired. I will sue you, and I will see you on the street. Get out of my house." Frank didn't back down. He looked at her with a mixture of professional detachment and genuine pity. "I don't work for you, Mrs. Redford," he said into the wireless microphone, ensuring his voice reached every corner of the silent penthouse. "And this is not your house. This apartment is currently being reclaimed by ownership due to severe violations of the lease agreement, including unauthorized commercial use of a residential unit, excessive noise complaints, and a total failure to pay rent." The investors, men like Marcus Sterling, who smelled failure the way sharks smell a drop of blood in the water, began to pull back toward the exits. The word eviction floated through the air, toxic and contagious, as guests began to set down their crystal flutes. Elena looked around, seeing her audience slipping away, and panic flared in her eyes as she grabbed Julian's arm, digging her manicured nails into his midnight blue tuxedo jacket. "Tell him, Julian," she shrieked, her voice trembling with the onset of hysteria. "Tell everyone this is a mistake. Tell them we own this place. Tell them about the company and the $200,000 we're raising." Julian looked at me, his eyes pleading, the color in his face replaced by a gray waxen pallor. "Dad, stop this. Please, you're destroying me," he hissed, his voice a frantic whisper. "Just tell them it's a misunderstanding. Pay the man. I'll pay you back every cent of the $14,500 once the wire clears. Just fix it." I looked at my son, a 32-year-old man begging his father to clean up a mess he had made, begging me to lie to save his ego after he had lied to me about his very life. I felt a profound sadness, but it was distant, like looking at an old photograph of a person who had died long ago. I remained silent. I nodded to Frank, who pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, the eviction order stamped and signed by the court. "Mr. and Mrs. Redford," Frank continued, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "You have been served with a notice to vacate. The grace period has expired, and the owner of this building has exercised his right to immediate possession. You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal effects and vacate the premises. Security will escort all guests out immediately." Elena let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking on a stone floor. She turned to the crowd, spreading her arms wide, trying to claw back control of the room. "This is ridiculous," she announced, her voice vibrating with a manic energy. "This is just a mix-up with the bank, a clerical error. Our landlord is a faceless corporation called Redford Holdings. They make mistakes all the time. We will have this sorted in the morning. Please, everyone, stay. Drink the champagne." She turned back to Frank, her eyes blazing with malice. "You're lying. You can't speak for the owner. You don't even know the owner. Redford Holdings is a massive company. Do you really think the board of directors cares about one party?" I took a step forward, the sound of my cane hitting the floor, the only noise in the room. The crowd parted for me, sensing the sudden shift in gravity as I walked until I was standing directly in front of Julian and Elena. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger that I had funded. I looked at the tuxedo on my son's back that I'd paid for. I looked at the fear behind their eyes. "Elena," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. It wasn't the voice of the mobile wallet or the lonely old man. It was the voice of the chairman. She looked at me, confused by the tone and the authority radiating from my suit. "What do you want, Arthur?" she hissed. "Go away. You're just an old man with a pension." "You said you rent from Redford Holdings," I said. "Yes," she snapped. "So what?" "You seem to be under the impression that Redford Holdings is a faceless corporation." I continued, taking another step closer as Julian tried to back away. "You think it's a machine that doesn't see you, just a name on a letterhead. You forgot something very important, Julian. You forgot to ask where the money came from. You forgot to ask who built the floor you're standing on. You forgot to ask who signed the checks that paid for your lifestyle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card, thick black with gold embossed lettering. I held it up. Redford Holdings is not a machine, I declared, my voice rising to fill the room with the force of a judgment. It is a man. I am Thomas Redford, the chairman of Redford Holdings. I own this building, I own this apartment, and I am the landlord you have been insulting for the last 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute, the silence of a bomb that had just detonated and sucked the oxygen out of the room. Elena stared at the card, her mouth opening, but no sound came out. She looked at me then, at Frank, who was bowing his head in deference, and back at me. The realization hit her eyes like a physical blow. The old man in the flannel shirt, the contractor she had treated like a janitor, he wasn't just rich, he was the power. Julian looked like he was going to be sick, slumping against the table as his legs gave out. "Dad," he whispered. You own the building." "I own 5 of them, Julian," I said coldly. "And I bought them with the money I made working the jobs you were too ashamed to talk about." A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus Sterling stepped forward, his voice full of a sudden sharp recognition. "Tom Redford?" he asked. "The Redford who developed the South Loop project in the 90s, I looked at Sterling and nodded once. "Yes, Marcus. That was me." Sterling turned to Julian, looking at my son with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You told me your father was a retired handyman," Sterling said, his voice a lash. "You told me you built your capital from crypto and your own grit." Julian stammered, unable to form words. Sterling laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You idiot. You had a legend for a father, and you tried to hide him. I'm out." Sterling walked out the door, and that was the signal for the dam to break. The guests, realizing they were witnessing a social execution, began to flee, putting down their drinks and grabbing their purses as they rushed for the elevators. In less than 2 minutes, the music was gone. The investors were gone, and the friends were gone. All that was left was the wreckage of a party that never should have happened, and the 3 of us standing in the ruins. Elena turned to me, her arrogance stripped away, to reveal the terrified grifter underneath. "But we are family," she stammered, tears ruining her makeup. "You can't evict family." "Arthur, please, this is a lesson, right? We learned it. We learned the lesson." I looked at the woman who had laughed about hiding me, the woman who had called me a dinosaur. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of photos, throwing them onto the table next to my business card. They fanned out, showing the white roses and the 10-tier cake from the wedding I wasn't invited to. "You got married on Saturday at the Ritz-Carlton," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the wind off the lake. "You said it was for special people only. You said I wouldn't fit in." "Well, Elena, you were right. I don't fit in with people who lie. I don't fit in with people who use me. And I certainly don't rent my penthouses to people who aren't family." Julian grabbed my hand, sobbing. "Dad, I'm sorry, I was weak. Transfer the money, just fix this." He was still asking for the transfer. Even now, at the end, he didn't want me. He wanted the money. I pulled my hand away as if his touch burned. "Didn't I tell you?" I said, the question hanging in the air like a final judgment. "I only pay rent for my family. And on Saturday, you made it very clear that I am not your family. The silence in this room is finally honest." "Julian," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings and the floor-to-ceiling glass that had once framed his stolen success. Julian remained on his knees, his face blotchy and wet with tears, his midnight blue tuxedo jacket rumpled as he clung to my trousers like a child who had just realized the floor was disappearing beneath him. Elena stood a few feet away, her silver silk gown now looking like a shroud, as she watched the last of the special people flee toward the elevators. "Dad, I'm sorry I was weak. I was stressed by the startup and the wedding. Please just tell them it's a mistake, Julian blubbered, his grip on my leg tightening. Transfer the $50,000 from the truck sale. If the money hits the management account, now we can tell Sterling and the others it was all a prank. We can still save the deal, Dad. I swear on my life I'll be a good son. I'll do whatever you want. Just send the transfer. I looked down at the top of his head, feeling a distance so vast, it was as if I were looking through the deep, dark water of Lake Michigan at a wreck that was beyond recovery. Even now, with the world I built for him collapsing, his mind was stuck in the same parasitic loop: Dad equals money, and money fixes everything. He wasn't asking for my forgiveness because he loved me. He was negotiating the price of my continued silence. You're still asking for a transaction, Julian, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You still think I'm just the plumbing that keeps your water running, necessary, but meant to be hidden behind the walls while you drink champagne at the Ritz. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the manila envelope Sarah had prepared, tossing it onto the glass table where it slid across the surface and stopped right in front of Elena. You wanted to play the self-made man tonight, Julian. You stood on that stage and accepted a toast for building your success from the ground up with nothing but your own grit. Elena snatched the documents, her eyes darting across the pages as she looked for a loophole. What is this? She hissed, her voice trembling. This isn't a transfer confirmation. It's a liquidation of an illusion, Elena, I replied. You told your friends I was a mobile wallet and a dinosaur who belonged in the shadows. I looked at my son, who finally let go of my leg and sat back on his heels, staring at me with a mixture of terror and confusion. I've spent 40 years building things that last. Bridges, skyscrapers, and foundations that don't crack under pressure. But the hardest thing I ever had to build was the resolve to say no to my own flesh and blood. I gestured to the empty room, the half-eaten Wagyu sliders, and the sweating bottles of Dom Perignon. You said I wouldn't fit in here because I was uncomfortable in these settings. You were right, but not for the reason you think. I'm uncomfortable with liars. I'm uncomfortable with people who exclude the man who gave them the life they are living. Arthur, please. Elena began, her tone shifting to a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. I was joking about the mobile wallet thing. It was just a bad joke. We're family. You can't throw family out on the street. It isn't who you are. You're right, Elena. I don't throw family out, I said, and for a split second I saw hope flare in her eyes, the entitlement reigniting. But as of last Saturday at the Ritz-Carlton, you made it very clear that I am not your family. I am just a guest you didn't invite, and strangers don't get to live in my penthouses for free. The penthouse is sold, Julian, I continued, my voice gaining a hard industrial edge. I signed the contract an hour ago. $3 million. Every cent of that profit is being moved into a new account, the Redford Scholarship for Trades. It will pay for toolkits and tuition for kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty, kids who know that self-made isn't a slogan for Instagram, but what you do when nobody is watching. Julian's face went white. You sold it? Where are we supposed to go? We have nothing. You have exactly 24 minutes left, I said, checking my Patek Philippe. At 9:31, Frank and the security team will lock this unit. Anything you cannot carry in your hands, the Italian leather sofa, the 70-inch television, that crystal chandelier, becomes the property of Redford Holdings to be liquidated to cover your outstanding debt. Elena turned on Julian, then her face twisting with a raw, ugly sound of frustration as the parasite finally realized the host had run dry. This is your fault, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. You said he was soft. You said you knew which buttons to push to make the old man open his checkbook. You promised me $50,000 for the Cabo trip and the credit cards I was trying to save us, Elena. Julian shouted back, his voice cracking. You saved nothing. she hissed, already walking toward the master bedroom. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Julian. She began grabbing her designer dresses and throwing them into a suitcase with a manic, desperate energy. I watched them for a moment, two strangers fighting over the scraps of a life they hadn't earned. "There is one more thing, Julian," I said, pulling a final document from my pocket. "The Hail Mary contract you signed 2 weeks ago, thinking I was transferring my assets to you for your medical emergency." Julian looked up, hope flickering one last time. "Yeah, what about it? You didn't read the fine print, did you? You just wanted the money," I said. "That contract was a transfer of liability. You are now the sole owner of Titan Marine's environmental shell company. It carries $14 million in outstanding maritime fines and cleanup costs for those ships you were too ashamed to talk about. The state will be looking for payments starting tomorrow." The color didn't just leave his face. It was as if his very soul had been liquidated. $14 million, Dad, you can't. You wouldn't. "I already did," I said. "But I'm giving you a way out. Sarah has a secondary agreement. If you agree to an indentured apprenticeship, 5 years of labor at my salvage yard in Ohio, starting at the bottom, earning a wage that will go toward paying off those fines, I will put a stay on the legal proceedings. You'll learn how to weld. You'll learn how to haul steel in the winter. You'll learn the value of a dollar that you actually earned." Julian stared at the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at the luxury penthouse, then at his ruined tuxedo, and finally at the Bodo Bauho, the work coveralls that Frank had brought up and tossed onto the marble floor. "Take it or leave it, Julian," I said, walking toward the elevator. "But the clock is ticking. You wanted to be a self-made man. Now you have the chance to actually build one from the rubble." Elena ran past us toward the elevator, clutching 2 overflowing suitcases, not even glancing back at Julian as he sat among the Wagyu sliders and broken dreams. She was gone before the doors even opened. Julian was alone. "I'm done being the safety net son," I said as the elevator chimed. "I'm choosing to be the gravity." I stepped into the elevator with Sarah. As the doors closed, I saw Julian reach out and touch the rough fabric of the work coveralls with a hand that had never known a day of hard labor. It was the first honest thing he had done in years. "Everything is satisfactory, Frank," I said as we reached the lobby. I walked out into the cool Chicago night air, which tasted like freedom and the cold, hard truth of a building finally cleared. The silence in the penthouse had settled like a fine, comfortable dust exactly 30 days since I cleared out the rot. I stood on the balcony of Unit 41, for the very last time, the wind off Lake Michigan biting at my neck. But I didn't reach for a designer scarf. I had my old flannel shirt back on. I wasn't wearing the Italian suit anymore. That was just a costume for a necessary performance. Today, I was just Arthur again. But I was a lighter version of myself, a man who had finally dropped the dead weight of 2 grown adults who saw me as nothing more than a utility. On the glass table inside, the only piece of furniture left in the entire $3 million hollow shell, sat a manila envelope from my private investigator. I had kept him on retainer for peace of mind, just to make sure the chapter was truly closed. The report I opened this morning over a cup of diner coffee was as predictable as it was tragic. The photos showed a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, a place with buzzing neon signs that charged by the hour, a far cry from the chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton. In those grainy images, I saw the final act of a hollow marriage play out on cracked asphalt. Julian and Elena were screaming at each other, though I didn't need to hear the audio to know the script. She was blaming him for the eviction. He was blaming her for the spending. They were 2 parasites who had finally run out of a host and had nothing left to do but turn on each other. The report confirmed that Elena didn't stay long. A black SUV driven by one of the venture capitalists from the party, a man with even fewer scruples than Marcus Sterling, had picked her up. She threw her suitcase into the trunk without a single look back at the man she had called her husband, leaving my son standing in a cloud of exhaust with nothing but a plastic bag of clothes. Julian is alone now, with no wife, no penthouse, and no father to call. I stared at the photo of him looking small and lost, waiting for the familiar pang of guilt to make me reach for my checkbook. But the well had run dry. He is at rock bottom, and rock bottom is the only solid foundation he has ever stood on. Now, he has a choice. He can build something real, or he can stay there. But it is finally his life to live, not mine to subsidize. I turned away from the empty view and walked back towards Sarah Jenkins, who was waiting by the kitchen island with a stack of final documents. "Are you ready to sign, Arthur?" She asked, her expression softer than I'd seen it in years. I picked up the heavy fountain pen and looked at the contract of sale for $3 million. The buyers were a young couple, both architects, who cared about the bones of the building rather than the prestige of the address. "I'm ready," I said, and the ink flowed smoothly as I signed my name for the last time in this building. "That's it then," Sarah said, sliding the papers into her briefcase. "The wire transfer for the $3 million will hit your account by this afternoon. Do you want me to move it into the high-yield savings with the rest of your portfolio?" "No," I said, capping the pen with a decisive click. "I want you to open a new account. We're starting a foundation, the Redford Scholarship for Trades and Construction." Sarah smiled a genuine wide smile. "I want every cent of this sale to go into that fund." I continued. "I want to pay for trade schools, I want to buy toolkits for apprentices, and I want to help the kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty, the ones who know that self-made isn't a slogan you put on Instagram, but what you do when nobody is watching." "Consider it done, Arthur," she said. We shook hands not as attorney and client, but as friends who had weathered a storm together. When the elevator doors closed, and she was gone, I took one last walk through the rooms. I walked through the master bedroom where they had slept, dreaming of a life they hadn't earned, and the bathroom where they had pined in mirrors I paid for. I felt no ghosts, just the satisfaction of a job site that had finally been cleared of debris. I took my phone out and scrolled past Julian's number. I hadn't blocked him, but he had stopped calling a week ago. Maybe he was finally starting to learn. I found the number for my brother Mike in Ohio, the man Elena said wasn't special enough for their world. The phone rang twice before his booming, cheerful voice filled the empty penthouse. "Arthur, to what do I owe the pleasure? Everything okay in the big city?" "Everything is perfect, Mike," I said. And for the first time in years, I meant it. "Tell me, are the bass still biting down at the creek?" Mike laughed, a sound that felt more real than any toast at the Ritz. "Biting. They're practically jumping into the boat, Tom. Why are you thinking of coming down?" "I'm not thinking about it, Mike." "I'm coming. Pack the cooler and get the cabin ready. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon." There was a pause of surprise on his end. "Tomorrow? But what about the business? Don't you have to manage things?" "I'm retired, Mike," I said, letting the word roll off my tongue like honey. "I'm officially fully retired. I dropped a very heavy load today, brother, and now I'm light. I just want to fish, drink a beer I bought with my own money, and talk to a man who actually knows my name." Mike's chuckle was warm. "Well, get on the road then. The fish are waiting, and the beer is cold." I hung up and walked out, the heavy mahogany door clicking shut behind me. It wasn't the click of a lock keeping me out. It was the sound of a book closing on a long, sad story. I took the elevator to the lobby where Frank stood at attention. "Everything is satisfactory, Frank. The new owners take possession tomorrow. Treat them well." I walked out through the glass doors into the city noise, the sirens, the traffic, the life of Chicago. But I didn't hear chaos. I heard the music of freedom. My old pickup truck was parked right in front, dusty and dented a working man's truck. I climbed into the driver's seat, breathing in the familiar smell of old coffee and sawdust. I started the engine, a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated in my chest and merged into traffic heading south toward the highway. I wasn't a mobile wallet anymore, and I wasn't an embarrassment. I was Arthur, a builder who had finally done the hardest part of the job I had let go. The city faded in my rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a memory on the horizon, and the air tasted sweet. It tasted like the future. The hardest thing I ever built wasn't a skyscraper. It was the resolve to say no to my own flesh and blood. Many parents mistake unconditional funding for unconditional love. But that is a poison that kills character. When you allow yourself to be treated as an ATM, you don't purchase respect, you only rent hypocrisy. True love sometimes looks like an eviction notice. It's letting your children fall so they can finally learn to stand. I've learned that you must never trade your dignity for a seat at a table where you are not respected. That is the one asset you must never liquidate.